Welcome everyone, I hope you are well. In today's episode we will be discussing Dinosaur Relics and the Acambaro Figures. We have been consistently told in Western science that dinosaurs perished in a worldwide disaster around 64 million BC. But the so-called theory of evolution is simply a postulated concept and nothing more. Because so much time, effort and money has been spent on propagating the deceptions which define the theory of evolution, most academics, whether they are paleontologists or anthropologists, cannot allow their postulated theory of evolution to be exposed as just another bogus and questionable theory of Western science. The contemporary understanding about the Acambaro figures began with a merchant and field archaeologist from the city of Brenum in northern Germany, named Waldemar Josefred, also known as Waldemar Robert Ludwig Josefred Walden. On the 26th of July 1944, Waldemar Josefred was riding his horse along the perimeter around the Bull Hill in a dried out part of Bull Stream that is a small tributary of the Lima River of the Acambaro, which is located in an area of southeastern Guanajuato within central Mexico. Whilst he was there, Waldemar noticed parts of clay objects sticking out of the dirt and dust. Over time, he then collected over 33,000 ceramic figurines. Professor Charles Hutchins Hapgood from Harvard University refuted the theory of evolution, and with fascination he visited Mexico to examine the Acambaro figures that Waldemar Josefred had found. Professor Hapgood also invited his close friend known as Erie Stanley Gardner, and because of his visit to Mexico, Erie Stanley Gardner then wrote a book in 1969 called The Host with the Big Hat, which intricately mentions the Acambaro figures as he had a huge interest in the subject. Interestingly, Erie also wrote and created the fictional mainstream character Perry Mason, which were books, radio plays and films. During 1972, Professor Charles Hutchins Hapgood wrote and published a book called The Mystery of the Acambaro. Did the dinosaur survive until recently? Which concern the Acambaro figures which the merchant and field archaeologist Waldemar Josefred had discovered in central Mexico. So what do the Acambaro figures reveal about the theory of evolution and the history of the dinosaurs? As a trained and qualified historian, Charles Hutchins Hapgood knew of the need for the date of the Acambaro figures. So by utilising the most up-to-date methods on the 15th of October 1968, Charles Hapgood submitted 3 samples to Isotopes Incorporated of Westwood in Bergen County, northeastern New Jersey for C14 radiocarbon dating. The first sample came back as 3,590 years old. The second sample was 6,480 years old. The third was 3,060 years old. To be thorough, Charles Hapgood also submitted 4 samples to the University of Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology, commonly known as the Penn Museum, for dating with thermoluminescence, a more accurate way to date pottery. Each of the 4 samples came up with a date of 2500 BC, plus or minus 190 years. Dr. Froelich Glanston Rainey, realizing the importance of accuracy in the C14 radiocarbon dating of these pieces, did runs on each of the 4 samples and came up with exactly the same results. So from this research, it would suggest that dinosaurs could have existed less than 5,000 years ago, or a lot less than 64 million years ago. The various kinds of Acambaro figures had the appearance of lagartos grandes or great lizards that are called dinosaurs or terrible lizards, which among the local Mexicans become known as the Figuras Lagarto Acambaro, or celebrated lizard figures. Some of the Figuritas Acambaro, or celebrated place figurines, clearly appeared to be a species of dinosaurs, which included the Patasaurus, the Stegosaurus, the Iguanodon, the Nodosaurus, the Ankylosaurus, and the Triceratops. Other kinds of figurines showed humanoids that appeared to be extraterrestrials that were standing next to flying discs. Many of the Acambaro figures display humans riding or wrestling various races with dinosaurs. Of course, representations of these dinosaurs in prehistoric artwork were unheard of because Homo sapiens apparently never coexisted with the different species of dinosaurs, according to the academics from Western science. The unusual looking Acambaro figures, which for many years have been literally created and not available for examinations, are now on display for all to observe at the Waldemar Josfrid Museum in the city of Acambaro, Mexico. So why doesn't the Smithsonian Institution from Washington not send teams of academics to Mexico to do further analysis of the Acambaro figures? Waldemar Robert Ludwin Josfrid Walden was already familiar with Mesoamerican ceramics, as he had one of the largest collection of artifacts from the famous religious worship site known as Chupacaro, or Blue Place, of the Purepecha tribe. For some of the Spanish conquistadors and the Catholic Spaniards, these individuals were defined with the derogatory term of Indios Tarascanos, or the Tarascan Indians. Whilst he was not selling hardware, Waldemar Josfrid was excavating or acquiring pieces for his collection, and over the years Waldemar became quite the archaeologist. Just after he had discovered the Acambaro figures on the 26th of July 1944, Waldemar Josfrid asked his employer, who was a local farmer named Odilon Tinajero, if he could find more of the Acambaro figures for him. Waldemar would pay Odilon Tinajero exactly 1 peso for each Acambaro figurine brought to him intact or with pieces that were easily put together. This then began his collection, and over 5 to 6 years Waldemar Josfrid gathered over 35,900 of these bizarre Acambaro figurines. On the 18th of June 1947, when Waldemar Josfrid publishes a booklet on his discoveries called the Enigmas del Pasado, or the Riddles of the Past, the various Acambaro figures began to receive international attention. On Sunday the 25th of March 1951, Lau Judith Ronda Harmer, a veteran writer for the Los Angeles Times, published an article titled "Mexico Finds Give Hint of Lost World. Dinosaur statues point to men who lived in the age of reptiles." Lau Judith Ronda Harmer had visited the city of Acambaro on the 25th of March 1951 and describes in his article the sheer volume of the collection in the house of Waldemar Josfrid. He wrote that the Acambaro figures filled the floor, the tables and the wall cabinets to overflowing. The Los Angeles writer also wondered in his article, how could it be a hoax? Not even in Mexico, where money is so scarce, could anyone afford the labour of these thousands of statues at the low prices Josfrid is paying? While seemingly convinced of their authenticity, as an objective writer, Lau Judith Ronda Harmer finished off his article by saying, "I am a writer, not an archaeologist. It will be up to the experts to decide." The following year, on the 20th of April 1953, the Mexican government got involved in the Acambaro mystery. The Mexican government sent 4 archaeologists from the National Institute of Anthropology and the History of the Mexican government in Mexico City to investigate the situation. They set up an excavation site about 1.5 kilometers from the original discovery location of Waldemar Josrad, near the perimeter of the Bull Hill near to the Acambaro in central Mexico. They excavated a Pacific area 6.5 feet down and found dozens of Acambaro figures, similar to those of Waldemar Josrad, including numerous lizards that are called dinosaurs or terrible lizards. The highly conventional National Institute of Anthropology and History of the Mexican government then issued a statement that the Acambaro figures did correspond to the prehistoric civilizations of Chupacaro, or Blue Place, and could date to as early as 800 BC. They use C14 radiocarbon dating and thermoluminescence at least 22 times on the Acambaro figures and got no dating results that came through whatsoever. The site of Chupacaro, or Blue Place, is a famous religious worship site, and the name is derived from the Papicha language. The anciently founded Papicha tribe, who are likewise called the Western Highland Papicha, are likewise defined as the Indios Tarascanos, or the Tarascan Indians. However, this is a derogatory term which the Spanish conquistadors and Catholic Spaniards used to describe these individuals. The Papicha language is a linguistic and phonetic isolate that is spoken by 143,000 Papicha in the Michoacán state of central Mexico. The process of thermoluminescence is a form of brightness that is exhibited by the specific crystalline substance such as some minerals in clay. Because the crystalline substances absorb electromagnetic radiation, the process of thermoluminescence can be used to scan the previously accumulated electromagnetic radiation or other ionizing radiation, which continually become re-emitted as sequences of sparking brightness upon the heating of the crystalline substances. After the 31st of August 1954, archaeologists from the National Institute of Anthropology and the History of the Mexican government refused to carry out any excavations and would likewise refuse to issue permits for other archaeologists to make subsequent excavations. Why would the Mexican government do this? Surely if the various Acambaro figures of dinosaurs were part of some bizarre hoax, the Mexican government could therefore easily validate whether or not the Acambaro figures were authentic or not. So why did they care? With some interest, the archaeologist known as Charles Corradino de Peso, who was employed at the Amerindian Foundation, which preserves the culture of Native American tribes, was sent to examine the Acambaro figures. Charles Corradino de Peso published his highly questionable and dubious findings in the 1953 American Antiquity magazine, and also the magazine called Archaeology that was published by the Archaeological Institute of America. Charles Corradino de Peso deliberately went down to Mexico with a clear bias to intentionally expose the Acambaro figures as a purposeful hoax. Although having the backing of the Amerindian Foundation, Charles Peso made very unscientific claims because Charles Peso did not use any scientific methodology for his falsified results. For starters, Charles Peso only spent 2 days in Acambaro and only 4 hours examining the collection of 35,900 Acambaro figurines. He did not set up and conduct an excavation of his own and deliberately ignored every single anomalous segment of information. The last attempts to date the Acambaro figures happened on the 21st of October 1976. The physicist known as Gary Caraveau and the research chemist who was called Mark Sheng Hang also used the dating technique of the thermoluminescence on 20 of the Acambaro figures. All of the samples failed the plateau test, which indicated that dates obtained from these figurines using high temperature thermoluminescent dating processes were not reliable and lacked any relevance or significance. Based on the signal regeneration found in some of the samples, Gary Caraveau and Mark Hahn avidly estimated that the Acambaro figures were fired sometime in October 1938 or January 1942, with actually knowing the truth, but simply guessing what date the Acambaro figures were produced. The claim of Gary Caraveau and Mark Hahn is utterly ludicrous, considering there were 35,900 Acambaro figures, no industrialized mass scale production facilities or even kilns in most farmhouses near to Acambaro. There is no possible way that 7 or 8 farmers would have been able to spend 20 years producing over 35,000 Acambaro figures. The different methods that academics from Western science have used to immediately state the Acambaro figures are an elaborate hoax and ridiculous. So yet again, it does appear that a supervised cover-up of truth behind the Acambaro figures has been deliberately facilitated. But why did academics from Western science feel the need to prove that the Acambaro figures were a hoax? Because if they already were fakes, why would anyone even bother to analyse them? So it would seem from the research that if the truth of the Acambaro figures was truly revealed, it would completely alter and change the theory of evolution. And it would also suggest that dinosaurs existed a lot less than 64 million years ago, and very possibly within the last 5,000 years, with humans living amongst them. So why are we constantly misled to the truth? Thank you for watching, everyone. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you next week.